tonight, as you close your eyes and slip into the quiet surrender of sleep, your brain will begin its nightly migration. Within minutes, the familiar dimensions of your bedroom will dissolve, replaced by a fluid, incredibly vivid reality where the laws of physics are suspended, dead relatives speak, and you can soar over impossible landscapes. We call this dreaming, and we comfort ourselves with the biological explanation that it is merely a harmless side effect of neural housekeeping, a temporary screensaver running while our physical cells repair themselves. But consider a deeply unsettling, reality-shifting paradox. What if you have already died in your sleep? Imagine that on a night much like this one, your physical heart quietly stopped beating. But instead of plunging into a dark, permanent void, your stream of subjective awareness simply glided across a seamless dimensional seam. What if the life you are living at this very moment is actually the continuum you entered after that unnoticed exit? A beautifully rendered, highly cohesive dream space that you have mistaken for the waking world. Our baseline understanding of human mortality relies entirely on the assumption of a hard, visible boundary. We believe that when the physical body expires, there must be a sudden, catastrophic interruption in our personal movie. A dramatic fading to black, followed by either an eternal afterlife or absolute non-existence. This linear view of survival keeps us securely anchored to the biological machine, convincing us that our conscious awareness is strictly bound to the status of our physical heart and lungs. Yet, if we look beneath the surface of modern quantum mechanics and advanced neurobiology, this clean, mechanical boundary between life and death completely breaks down. Consciousness is fundamentally a non-local phenomenon, an energetic signal that doesn't originate within physical matter, but is merely translated by it. When the biological receiver of the body undergoes a fatal event, the subjective observer does not experience a sudden end to their timeline. Instead, they experience an immediate, mathematically forced shift to the nearest viable continuum, where their awareness can remain unbroken. This conceptual framework forces us into a profound, highly destabilizing conflict with our daily waking state. If your consciousness is currently navigating a post-exit continuum, then the physical world around you is not as solid or objective as it appears. It implies that the fabric of your everyday life, the streets you walk, the career you pursue, the family members you love, is a highly customized, slow-motion projection engineered to maintain the comforting illusion of chronological continuity. Your mind, operating under a powerful survival directive, will aggressively smooth over the seam of your transition, constructing a plausible narrative of a normal morning, so that you never have to confront the staggering realization of your own physical departure. You go to work, pay your bills, and drink your morning coffee, entirely blind to the fact that the original version of your physical body is currently lying cold in a bed you left behind years ago. To comprehend the sheer scale of this protective mechanism, we must analyze the biological and psychological architecture of the awakening sequence itself. Every morning when you wake up, your brain experiences a massive surge of sensory data, violently anchoring your identity back into your physical form. We treat this as the definitive baseline of what is real. But if you have ever experienced a false awakening, a vivid dream where you woke up, brushed your teeth, and prepared for your day, only to startle awake a second time in your actual bed, you have witnessed the terrifying efficiency of your own subconscious architecture. Your mind is fully capable of constructing an identical molecule-for-molecule replica of your waking life to serve as a psychological shock absorber. If the mind can build a flawless simulation of reality to protect you from a minor waking glitch, what is to stop it from building a permanent, lifelong simulation to protect you from the ultimate shock of physical death? This realization mutates our relationship with memory, nostalgia, and the strange, unexplainable anomalies of our lives. We all carry quiet, forgotten moments that do not make logical sense. A sudden, near-miss car crash where we emerged entirely unscathed, yet felt a bizarre, lingering coldness for hours afterward. A severe illness from which we made an incredibly rapid, miraculous recovery. Or those subtle, eerie shifts in our external reality where a local landmark has suddenly changed, or a historic event is remembered differently by everyone else around us. In the classical model of the mind, we dismiss these occurrences as tricks of memory or statistical luck. But in the architecture of the continuous observer, these anomalies are the visible scars of a dimensional transfer. They are the brief, unbuffered glitches where your conscious signal made a sudden jump from a terminal timeline to a parallel continuum, leaving behind a subtle, phantom echo of the death you never realized you experienced. Yet, if our conscious awareness is an unbroken current that simply slides from one reality frame to another to ensure its own survival, we are left with a staggering, unresolved philosophical question. If we never truly wake up, but simply migrate from one continuum to the next, what is the ultimate destination of this journey? If the boundary between the dreaming mind and the waking mind is entirely artificial, how do we ever discover the true, original frequency of our consciousness? And how do we learn to navigate a reality where the exit door is permanently disguised as a new beginning? To confront the true nature of this continuous migration, we must step directly into the strange, counterintuitive arena of quantum mechanics and advanced neurological processing. If the conscious observer is a non-local signal that refuses to be extinguished, we have to examine the specific physical and biological mechanisms that allow an individual timeline to fracture and reform without dropping a single frame of awareness. In classical materialism, it is assumed that consciousness is a local product of the brain, a brief, fragile spark that vanishes the moment the biological machinery stops functioning. But when we look closer at the actual mathematical foundations of the physical universe, a far more complex reality emerges. According to the many worlds interpretation of quantum mechanics, the universe does not exist in a single objective state. Instead, it is an infinite web of overlapping probabilities, a massive multiverse where every possible outcome of every single event is actively realized across an endless array of branching timelines. This quantum framework introduces a profound concept known as quantum immortality. In any scenario where an observer faces a life or death event, a sudden mechanical failure, an illness, or a quiet cardiac arrest in the middle of the night, the timeline immediately splits into two distinct paths. In one branch, the physical body suffers a fatal collapse, and external observers mourn a passing. But in the parallel branch, the event tilts in a slightly different direction, or the conscious observer simply glides across a seamless dimensional seam into an adjacent, viable continuum where their life continues uninterrupted. Because you cannot subjectively experience non-existence, your personal awareness is mathematically forced to navigate only those branches of the multiverse where you survive. The individual never actually experiences the moment of extinction. Your subjective movie simply keeps running, seamlessly adapting its narrative to fit the laws of the new frame. This quantum displacement completely transforms our understanding of human memory and psychological trauma. If your conscious stream is constantly jumping across a web of branching continuums to preserve its own continuity, then the phenomenon known as the Mandela effect, where large groups of people distinctly remember a historical fact, a product name, or a celebrity's death differently than the official record, loses its status as a mere collective memory glitch. It becomes a visible indicator of cross-temporal migration. When you experience a sudden, jarring shift in a piece of cultural history or a minor detail in your immediate environment, you are not misremembering. Your internal antenna has simply experienced a subtle displacement. You are looking at a permanent, living artifact from the previous continuum you occupied before your awareness slipped across the seam into this one. Furthermore, this continuous survival mechanism demands that we look at the neurobiology of the human brain through a radically different lens. In standard neuroscience, the brain is treated as the creator of thought and perception, but advanced models of non-local consciousness suggest that the brain functions far more like a highly specialized biological prism or a radio receiver. Its primary purpose is not to generate awareness, but to limit it, to act as a data-reducing valve that compresses a vast, multi-dimensional reality into a thin, manageable trickle of sequential sensory inputs. When you are asleep, or when the physical body undergoes a terminal event, this biological valve temporarily dilates. The localized frequency of the ego expands, allowing the conscious signal to realign with the nearest compatible frequency in the space-time grid. Before the survival directive snaps the filter shut, once again, locking you back into the illusion of a normal, uninterrupted, waking day. This realization forces us to confront a deeply unsettling conflict regarding the nature of human agency and choice. If your path through the multiverse is a pre-existing web of geometric curves, and your awareness is simply sliding along the branches that guarantee its own survival, then the decisions you think you are making through raw willpower are actually acts of discovery rather than creation. Your mind is constantly moving forward through a complex labyrinth of probability, choosing the corridors that maintain the cohesive story of your life. The freedom you possess is not the freedom to rewrite the complete structure of the matrix, but the freedom to choose how consciously you observe the scenery as it unfolds before your eyes, allowing yourself to recognize that the script is already written from end to end. Yet, as we begin to see through the post-production of our neural buffering and accept the possibility that we are already living in a post-exit continuum, a deeper, more intimate layer of the mystery presents itself. If our lives are an unbroken series of dimensional handoffs, hidden beneath the mundane routines of our daily existence, what is the ultimate nature of the force directing the transfer? If the mind is an expert simulator designed to keep us looking at the screen, what happens when we look past the individual scenes to discover the true identity of the spectator sitting in the dark? And how do we begin to decode the hidden architecture of a world that refuses to let us die? To identify the silent director of this endless migration, we must look beyond the models of quantum physics and peer into the ancient mythologies and esoteric traditions that mapped this continuous transition thousands of years ago. In the ancient Egyptian cartography of the afterlife, found within the Book of the Dead, a person's passing was never depicted as a sudden, extinguishing void. Instead, it was described as a perilous, highly sophisticated journey through the duat, a series of distinct, otherworldly realms, gateways, and trials. Crucially, the traveler was expected to navigate these regions by reciting specific words of power, recognizing the entities they encountered, and maintaining a cohesive thread of self-awareness. The ancient initiates understood that the landscape of the afterlife was not an external, physical place, but a fluid projection of the traveler's own subconscious mind. If the soul lacked the training to remain lucid, it would simply fall back into a repeating loop, waking up in another dense incarnation, entirely blind to the fact that it had never truly escaped the wheel of rebirth. This ancient understanding of the mind's defensive architecture aligns perfectly with the hidden symbolic core of Western alchemy and Gnostic cosmology. The Gnostics spoke of the archons, cosmic gatekeepers who constructed a vast, illusory matrix of physical reality to keep human consciousness trapped in a state of permanent forgetfulness. According to this framework, the physical world is a series of nested spheres or continuums designed to mimic a home. When a soul attempts to exit the perimeter through physical death, the system immediately deploys a therapeutic illusion, a comforting vision of a peaceful meadow, a tunnel of light, or the familiar faces of lost loved ones. This sensory buffer is not a bridge to the ultimate source. It is a specialized cosmic firewall designed to gently pacify the traveler, resetting their memory and guiding their awareness back into a fresh, localized avatar within the system. The matrix protects its boundaries by making the transition feel so natural and so complete that the observer never realizes they have simply been redirected back into the labyrinth. When we look at this temporal architecture through the cross-cultural archetype of the sleepwalker. The psychological conflict reaches its absolute zenith. In folklore and psychological literature, the sleepwalker is an individual who acts out entire, complex dramas, walking through rooms, opening doors, and speaking to imaginary companions, while their conscious mind remains completely asleep, locked in a deep brain delta state. If you try to wake a sleepwalker too abruptly, they often experience a wave of profound disorientation and panic. Our waking human life is a macroscopic version of this nocturnal walk. We navigate our careers, build our houses, and argue over minor social dramas, operating under the absolute conviction that we are wide awake. But in the architecture of the continuous observer, this waking state is merely a highly organized, collective sleepwalk. We are dreaming with our eyes open, and the physical environment is the beautifully rendered room we are navigating, while our true, immortal consciousness remains dormant on a cosmic bed. This dynamic sheds a stunning new light on the phenomenon of modern spiritual awakening and the historic practice of lucid dreaming. For centuries, Tibetan Buddhists have practiced dream yoga, a discipline designed to maintain unbroken, conscious awareness as the practitioner transitions from waking life into deep sleep and ultimately into the dream state. The high-level initiates of this practice reported a staggering discovery. If you can learn to recognize the illusory nature of your dreams while you are inside them, you immediately unlock the ability to maintain lucidity during the ultimate transition of physical death. You realize that the terrifying monsters of your nightmares and the solid walls of your waking world are made of the exact same mind stuff. By refusing to believe in the solidity of the frame, the traveler dissolves the power of the firewall, stepping off the automated conveyor belt of dimensional migration and reclaiming their status as the primary writer of the reality grid. When you break through the illusion of the permanent ending in this manner, the entire architecture of human grief and existential dread undergoes a spectacular mutation. The terrifying specter of the grave is revealed to be nothing more than a transition scene in an ongoing, multi-chapter epic. You realize that the fear of death is actually a fear of the unknown scene, a biological panic designed to keep the avatar anchored to the current game board. The people you believe you have lost to the cold finality of time have not vanished into a silent void. They have simply migrated to a parallel track of the continuum, continuing their subjective movies with the exact same vitality they possessed when they shared your frame. The separation is an illusion born entirely from the narrow, localized frequency of your current biological receiver. Yet, as we learn to see through the post-production of our neurologic buffering and recognize the cosmic laws that guide our continuous migration, we are brought face to face with the practical landscape of our everyday lives. If this entire physical life is an unbroken series of dimensional handoffs designed to keep our consciousness in a state of continuous survival, how does this realization affect the way we handle our daily trials, our deepest anxieties, and the inevitable decay of our physical bodies? How do we translate the staggeringly vast concept of quantum immortality into a practical tool for absolute psychological freedom tomorrow morning. To transform this shattering of the final boundary into a practical tool for absolute freedom tomorrow morning, we must execute a radical shift in how we process our daily interactions. This shift requires the implementation of a cognitive discipline we can call radical realignment. Most people spend their waking hours in a state of constant, reactive anxiety, perpetually leaning forward into a hypothetical future or dragging the heavy weight of a perceived past. When a high-stakes deadline approaches, an unexpected financial strain hits, or our physical body exhibits a terrifying symptom of illness, our biology immediately shifts into a high beta state of survival, launching us into a frantic race against the clock. Radical realignment demands that the moment this stress spikes, you entirely freeze your external panic. Instead of treating tomorrow as an unwritten void you must desperately manipulate, you look directly at the friction and ask the definitive integration question. If this complete space-time continuum is already perfectly written to preserve my awareness, what state of consciousness is this specific coordinate forcing me to cultivate? This practice completely redefines the anatomy of our daily stress and bodily vulnerability. Consider the common modern complaint of being chronically starved for time. The exhausting sensation of running a race where the finish line is constantly moving. When you find yourself overwhelmed by an endless to-do list, the ego immediately concludes that you are the victim of an aggressive, fast-paced environment. But if you apply the law of the continuous observer, a far more challenging truth emerges. Your anxiety is not caused by a lack of time, but by your cognitive resistance to the current frame. You are attempting to process 10 frames ahead while your physical vehicle is anchored in this one. By shifting your perspective from a frantic architect trying to build tomorrow to an observer discovering a pre-existing path, you stop wasting energy fighting the flow of the script and begin the deep, urgent work of occupying your current coordinate with absolute presence. Furthermore, this realization demands that we dismantle our cultural obsession with regret, near misses, and the phantom choices of history. The human mind spends an immense amount of its processing bandwidth rewriting history, playing the agonizing game of what if. We believe that if we had made a different turn at that critical intersection, or if that sudden illness had never occurred, our current coordinate would be vastly superior. But the structural mirror of the multiverse exposes this behavior as a deeply irrational strategy of the ego. The past is not a soft clay that could have been molded differently. It is an immovable, necessary facet of the geometry that sustained your consciousness. The mistake you made, the path you missed, and the crisis you narrowly survived are permanent markers of the dimensional transfer that brought you to this exact moment of awakening. To reject the past is to reject the structural integrity of the entire map that preserved your current signal. To break this exhausting cycle of temporal fragmentation, you must learn the art of coordinated re-assimilation. This means deliberately choosing to view your current hardships not as random, chaotic interruptions to a good life, but as deliberate, pre-existing structural pillars designed to stabilize your psychological maturity. If you are perpetually triggered by uncertainty and the fear of what lies ahead, it is not because the future is inherently hostile. It is because your neural firewall is tightly gripped by the illusion of physical finality. You have lived so long under the tyranny of planning for an ending that the concept of an already written masterpiece feels like an assault on your agency. Integrating the continuous continuum means allowing yourself to execute your actions without the desperate attachment to outcomes, demanding excellence from your current focus while surrendering the need to dictate the layout of the next turn. This practical shift permanently alters the structural landscape of your personal and professional life. You no longer enter rooms, corporate meetings, or doctors' offices looking for reassurance about how things will turn out, because you recognize that the tapestry is already complete from end to end. The minor panics of daily life, the missed flight, the difficult conversation, the structural shifts of an industry, or the sudden breakdown of physical systems are revealed to be precise, inevitable rehearsals for your own evolutionary expansion. You realize that you cannot truly lose your way on a path that was drawn before the stars were born. You are simply the light of awareness walking through the exhibition, watching the landscape reveal itself piece by piece. Yet, as you master this waking integration and begin to walk through the world with the calm, detached clarity of an unshakable observer, you are brought to the final, ultimate threshold of the human experiment. If every second of your existence is an unalterable coordinate within an interconnected crystal of space-time that refuses to let you fade to black, what is the final revelation that awaits us when the illusion of sequence is completely integrated? What happens when the flashlight beam of the biological brain permanently widens? The artificial barrier between yesterday and tomorrow dissolves, and we are forced to look at the raw, unvarnished reality that exists at the absolute end of time. When the illusion of sequence is completely integrated, and the artificial barrier between the dream and the waking world permanently dissolves, you arrive at the ultimate revelation of the human experiment. The final, reality-shifting twist of this dimensional odyssey is not that your consciousness will survive physical death at some distant point in the future. It is that you have already died 1,000 times, and yet you have never missed a single beat of your own existence. The boundary wall between this life and whatever lies next is exposed as a masterful piece of psychological staging. For your entire life, the biological pacing of the physical brain has convinced you that you were a fragile, isolated traveler walking a high wire across a deep and final void. But as you step into the absolute clarity of the continuous mind, the grandest cosmic joke of the mortal simulation is laid bare. You realize that the exit door you feared was never a drop into non-existence, but a quiet, seamless transition to an adjacent room of your own house. This understanding delivers a profound, liberating resolution to our expedition. True freedom is not found by running from mortality, but by consciously occupying the center of the unbroken line. When you no longer disown your transitions or dread the final scene, the matrix of chronology can no longer force you into the reactive loop of anxiety, grief, and survival. The script can no longer terrify the actor who knows the play has infinite acts. The frantic urgency collapses. The haunting weight of missed opportunities and narrow escapes fades. The old existential war with aging ceases. But instead of darkness or apathy, you are met with an immense, unshakable peace. You do not cease to live your human life. You simply expand into it. You wake up from the heavy, exhausting dream of being a solitary biological body, defending itself against a cold, final extinction, and you return to the vast, unified reality of an immortal observer who recognizes that every coordinate of their journey is an eternally preserved, living work of art. This realization permanently transforms the posture with which you occupy the remaining scenes of your physical life. You no longer walk through the world as a frantic survivor, desperately trying to fix or manage the timeline around you. You move with the effortless grace of an immortal curator who knows that every character in the room, every delay, every illness, and every unexpected shift is a prop designed to illuminate a deeper, static truth. The frantic demands of the social clock, the manufactured panics of the digital grid, and the artificial deadlines of validation lose their gravity. You can look directly into the eyes of your deepest losses, your unmapped futures, and the broader chaos of human history with a quiet, unshakable compass. You know, with absolute certainty, that every friction is an invitation, every trigger is a roadmap, and the entire narrative has always been a journey back home to yourself. As you step away from this documentary and return to the immediate reality of the room around you, the dense architecture of the waking matrix will instantly attempt to reclaim your focus. The world will demand your worry, your schedule will demand your panic, and your mind will try to pull the familiar override switches of linear projection. But the threshold has been crossed. The next time you sit across from a mountain of stress, feel the phantom grief of a moment long gone, or experience a bizarre, inexplicable glitch in your daily routine, do not rush to push it away or launch into a frantic defense. Sit perfectly still in the quiet space of your own awareness. Feel the immense weight of the eternal now making impact within your biology, and look past the surface of the physical screen. If the illusion of the single, fragile life has kept you running for a lifetime, imagine the reality that is waiting when you finally have the courage to look through the seam and recognize that you are already awake.